Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Now in today's episode, we're going to be installing Windows XP Professional x64 edition on that HP laptop that I've featured in the past couple of videos on this channel. It's currently running the leaked build of Windows 11, but yeah, we're going to be installing the 64-bit or one of the 64-bit releases of Windows XP on it today. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you who have been watching this channel for a little while now have heard me say many times, there were two separate 64-bit releases of Windows XP. There was Windows XP Professional x64 edition and Windows XP Professional 64-bit edition. And it's kind of confusing, but these are both 64-bit releases, but they're for two different architectures. This one right here is for the x86-64 architecture, and Windows XP 64-bit edition was created for Intel's Itanium architecture. Now, Itanium is a whole nother rabbit hole that we could go down in a separate video, but to give you the gist of it, to really sum it up for you in this video here, it was another 64-bit architecture completely distinct from x86-64, and it was marketed for enterprise and high-end use. And it's actually on its way out. Intel has already announced they're going to be discontinuing the Itanium platform. Now, to make things even more confusing, the 64-bit Itanium release of XP had two separate releases within it. One of them was based, the first version was based on the XP code base, and the second edition, kind of, that's not what it was called, but the second version was based on the Server 2003 code base. Now, both of those versions were discontinued in 2005. Also in 2005, Microsoft released Windows XP Professional x64 edition for the x86-64 architecture or platform, whatever term you want to use. However, this version was announced back in 2003 via a press release from Microsoft, and at that time they were calling it Windows XP 64-bit edition for 64-bit extended systems. Yeah, it rolls off the tongue really well. Now, the name, jokes aside, though it is a bit long, actually makes sense because x86-64 is technically an extension of the x86 instruction set, so you can see why they chose that name to kind of distinguish it from the Itanium version that was already released at this time. Now, I have talked about doing a sort of comparison video between these two versions, but really the major difference is the fact that they were created for different architectures. What they have in common, though, is they were not nearly as popular as the 32-bit releases of XP Home and XP Pro. These both were far more popular, as I'm sure we all know. Now, the reason for this is pretty straightforward. The average consumer is not going to end up with an Itanium-based system. In fact, they're not even going to end up with an x86-64 based system because 32-bit was far more popular and widespread in the realm of consumer computing. That's why Microsoft did not create a 64-bit version of XP Home. So, what would you get if you ended up with an x86-64 machine and you acquired a copy of Windows XP Professional x64 edition? Well, one of the biggest features was more RAM support. You could install up to 128 gigabytes of RAM. It could also support two physical CPUs, not cores, but two physical CPUs on the motherboard. Now, just like the second release of the Itanium-based XP 64-bit, this version was based on the Server 2003 code base from the very start, which was newer and more versatile than the Windows XP code base. Now, Microsoft would later base Windows Vista on the same code base. Now, one of the major side effects of basing these two versions on different code bases is the updates Microsoft released for them were not cross-compatible, so Microsoft had to have a separate stream of updates for each release. In fact, when this version came out, Windows XP 32-bit Service Pack 2 was already released. So Microsoft implemented some of the features and updates in that Service Pack in the initial release of this version here, and this version never got a Service Pack 3, only a Service Pack 1 and 2, though it was supported until the same April 8th, 2014 end of support date. Now, just like modern 64-bit releases of Windows, Pro x64 utilized WoW 64, which allowed the operating system to run 32-bit applications. However, Also, like modern 64-bit releases of Windows, it does not include the NT Virtual DOS machine, meaning that 16-bit applications cannot run on it natively, though there are some third-party tools like OTVDM that we've talked about many times on this channel that can still get the job done for you, though that did not exist when this version came out, right? Now, the interesting thing about this version here, if you haven't already noticed, is it is a pre-release build of Pro x64, so yeah, we're going to be installing it today on that HP laptop, and we're going to be seeing how it compares to the mainstream 32-bit release of XP Pro. Now, I want to give a huge thanks to Rodney for making this video possible, because he is the person who sent this out to me, along with some other Microsoft software, including this Beta 2 customer preview build of Windows Vista, and this ready-to-launch kit here also from Microsoft. So yeah, we may take a look at these in a separate video, but let's just jump into it and take a look at what Microsoft Windows XP Professional x64 Edition, this pre-release build, has to offer. Alright, so here we are, everybody. We've got the laptop booted up here, and we are going to be doing kind of a downgrade here, though maybe it's an upgrade for those of you who are not big fans of Windows 11. But yeah, so we're going to pop in the XP Pro x64 CD right here, if I don't drop it on the floor. So let's pull that out and pop it on into the LightScribe. You guys remember that? This is a LightScribe DVD drive in this computer. Windows 11 comes up with our... Well, let's try to run the installer here within Windows 11 and just see what it does. It's going to probably tell us that, oh, this is an older version. It's not going to let us, you know, go through the upgrade process. We're going to have to reboot, which is fine. That's what I was expecting to do anyway, but we'll run it here. Now, we can click on install here, but you may be able to hear it's giving us an error sound. So, I wonder what check system compatibility. Is that also going to be... Yeah, so the main tool up here is grayed out, but we can go to the website, which is, I mean, we can't do that now because it's non-existent. So yeah, we're just going to restart here. It should automatically boot off the CD here. I've got the BIOS configured that way. Now, the system requirements, if you were curious for this version, are obviously a 64-bit processor, 256 megs of RAM, 1.5 gigs of available hard disk space, CD-ROM or DVD drive, and a keyboard and mouse. They actually list that in here, so yeah, just in case you didn't know. But yeah, so I expect certainly the initial installation process here, where it's going to be copying files and all of that, to be identical to the 32-bit release of XP, and really most of the NT-based releases. This initial portion here, if you've ever installed Windows NT, an early version of Windows NT, or an NT-based OS like Windows 2000, this looks very familiar to you. You've seen this many times on this channel. It's the same here. It's the same in Windows XP 32-bit. I would also expect, once we reboot and go into the more graphical portion of the installation, I would expect that to be the same design, but I'm curious to know if the text blurbs, where it's talking about the new features and all of that, if those have been changed to talk about specific features in this release, such as the additional RAM support, how you can have up to 128 gigabytes of RAM. So we'll see once we get to that point, but it is still loading files here. Looks to be going along though, so that's good. And this machine, by the way, I put the 5400 RPM hard drive back in it and left the 2 gigabytes of RAM in it from the last video, the last project video we did on this. So those are the specs that we're working with. So far, it just says XP Professional at the top, no mention of 64 bits or x64 edition. You're going to press enter to continue. Did not find any hard disk drives installed on your computer. Plug and play detected an error most likely caused by a faulty driver. If this is the first time you've seen the stop error screen, restart your... Okay, so the reason it's not finding the hard disk drive is because the hard disk is a SATA hard disk. So there are a couple of fixes for this issue. One of them is just getting a SATA driver and pressing F6 before the setup loads and loading that driver. We can also, if our BIOS allows us to, we should be able to go into, I believe it would be under system configuration. There we go, SATA native mode. We can set this to disable, will allow the system to treat it as an IDE drive. And there we go, beautiful. It is detecting the hard drive now. We're here at the license agreement. There's a couple things I want to point out. Number one, the 360-day license right there. So this is, once again, an evaluation copy, though the evaluation period is much longer than I've usually seen with Microsoft software. Also check this out, it's identifying the system as Windows XP 64-bit edition for AMD 64-bit systems, which is closer to the original name that they announced in that press release. We're going to do a quick format here. Okay, so we have restarted here, and as I expected, we have the same design of the setup here, but you'll notice that the text blurbs, like this one right here, is talking about WoW 64, but I didn't really expect the overall design to change, and not like it really had to be honest. So yeah, so far there seems to be more of a focus on the under the hood improvements in those text blurbs, as opposed to saying something like, oh, it's so much easier to use, and there's a new interface, and, you know, new design. Windows Movie Maker is a thing, Windows Media Player, you know. So yeah, there's more of a focus on under the hood stuff, which is appropriate considering this is a professional 64-bit version. So we're going to go through the regional and language options here, type in our name. We'll just do, I've got caps lock on. We'll do Michael, enter our product key. And we're going to name this XP x64. We're not going to bother with an administrator password, and it thinks it's January 4th, 1980, so we'll fix that. After Windows XP Professional x64 Edition is installed, you won't have to search for updates online to stay up to date. You can opt to receive update reminders as often as you want to keep your computer operating at peak efficiency. Okay, so there appears to be a time bomb. Luckily, Windows will allow us to change the date back. Oh, check that out. Oh, so the boot screen does say 64-bit edition. That's interesting. Again, that's the name, that's the official name of the Itanium version. So that's interesting. I did not know that. At least this evaluation copy does. It could have been changed. In fact, I think it was changed. Oh, and there doesn't appear to be an out-of-box experience either. And you'll notice here, check this out on the desktop, we have this pop-up that says, please help us improve this beta version of Windows, though the title says Microsoft Windows Server 2003, which is, again, the code base that this version is based on. So that is interesting there, so this was not changed. So we're going to click on Don't Send here. Also of note, the default desktop wallpaper is not Bliss. It is the Windows flag, though it just says Professional x64 Edition here instead of XP Professional. We go to Properties, though, and let's see if Bliss is in here. No, it's not. I mean, well, the name of the wallpaper is, but they've just replaced the Bliss wallpaper file itself with this one here. But it looks like we have all the other wallpapers here, or no, not all of them, but we have some of them. Screensavers, let's check this out. It seems like less to me, maybe that's just me. Okay, so the full Luna theme is here with the 3 different color schemes. I've changed the resolution here to 800 by 600. The highest we can go is 1024 by 768, but that still is not, I mean, you can see we've got black bars on the side of the screen, so this is not taking advantage of. Now, of course, we don't have proper drivers installed, but yeah, we'll just set it to 800 by 600 for this video so you can see everything a little bit better. That also changed the desktop wallpaper for some reason. We'll set it back to Bliss, quote unquote. Yeah, so there we go. And if we go to WinVer, I'm curious. Oh, by the way, at the bottom here, you see you got the build string. This is Service Pack 1, actually, build 3790, so I want to look that up and see. According to BetaWiki, build 3790.3959 is the Service Pack 2 release, what appears to be the final Service Pack 2 release of XP x64 here. Okay, so I found a BetaWiki page on this particular build, but according to it, this build was lost and was found and released to Beta Archive on the 2nd of January 2020. I wonder if they have a scan of the packaging, though. That could be something I could contribute to Beta Archive or to the Internet Archive. But yeah, so there you go. That's a little history. They say this build was compiled on July 26, 2004. And just for reference, the final version of this was released on April 25th, 2005. At this point, when this build was compiled, there was less than 1 year to go until the final RTM build was released to manufacturing. So if you were wondering when this build was compiled, there you go. So in terms of changes, obviously there's not going to be really any visual changes aside from the branding. Again, you saw what it looks like in WinVer here. It's branded with Professional x64 Edition, the wallpaper, the build string here at the bottom. But in terms of the user interface, nothing really has changed, not that I was expecting it to. I mean, obviously this is still Windows XP. So you see we have this new item in the control panel, View x86 control panel icons. So this here will, I believe, open up, a separate control panel here. Now, just like every other 64-bit release of Windows, if we go to the C drive here and show the contents of this drive, we do have both a Program Files and a Program Files x86 folder, and this gives us the ability to install 32-bit applications. They will be stored in Program Files x86 here. So we have some 32-bit programs installed like Messenger. I guess there was not a 64-bit version of MSN Messenger compiled. If we go to Program Files, my guess is that's not going to be in here. So yeah, we've got common files, com plus applications, IE. Oh, there is MSN. Oh, there's MSN Explorer, but not Messenger. Okay. Online services, Outlook Express, and Windows NT. We've got Hyper Terminal and Pinball. Wait a second. Is this a 64-bit version of 3D Pinball Space Cadet? I think that's exactly what this is. Very, very interesting. Now, we don't have the sound driver installed, but I remember reading, and I talk about this in my 3D Pinball Space Cadet history video. You can check that out here if you missed it. That was a few years ago. The reason this was dropped from Windows Vista was because Microsoft had issues compiling a 64-bit version of it, because this was written for Microsoft by a third-party company. This seems to be, I mean, it was in the Program Files folder for 64-bit programs. Okay, so we're back here on my main computer, and I've copied over the pinball folder from Windows XP x64 Edition. And I've downloaded a program called SIGCheck, which will allow us to view some information about the executable, and it will tell us if it was compiled for the 32-bit or 64-bit architecture. So we're going to open up a command prompt here, and we're going to run SIGCheck 64 pinball, and we have to agree to the sysinternal. This is a sysinternals. Oh, we have to do .exe, I believe. Machine type 64-bit. That means this is a 64-bit application. That is crazy because, okay, so this is the post that I was talking about right here. This is from Raymond Shen, who has posted all sorts of behind-the-scenes development stories, and this is one of them. So he explains why pinball was removed from Windows Vista, and he says, one of the things I did in Windows XP was port several million lines of code from 32-bit to 64-bit so we could ship Windows XP's 64-bit edition. But one of the programs that ran into trouble was Pinball. The 64-bit version of Pinball had a pretty nasty bug where the ball would simply pass through other objects like a ghost. In particular, when you started the game, the ball would be delivered to the launcher and then it would slowly fall towards the bottom of the screen through the plunger and out the bottom of the table. Games tended to be really short. Two of us tried to debug the program to figure out what was going on, but given that this was code written several years earlier by an outside company, being Cinematronics, and that nobody at Microsoft ever understood how the code worked, much less still understood it, and that most of the code was completely uncommented, we simply couldn't figure out why the collision detector was not working. Heck, we couldn't even find the collision detector. We had several million lines of code still to port, so we couldn't afford to spend days studying the code trying to figure out what obscure floating point rounding error was causing collision detection to fail. We just made the executive decision right there to drop Pinball from the product. If it makes you feel better, I am saddened by this as much as you. I really enjoyed playing that game. So let's check that out, because so this was dropped from the final release of XP 64-bit, or XP x64 Edition. Nope, as it turns out, that isn't the case at all. There was a 64-bit version of Space Cadet Pinball included with the final RTM release of Windows XP Professional x64 Edition. And with all that said, I think that is a great stopping point for today's video. Now, this video was originally going to continue on for, I'd say, an additional 20, maybe even 30 minutes, but after recording part of that, I decided that it would be better off to include it in a video of its own, because we kind of dive into a completely separate topic. We talk specifically about Space Cadet Pinball, and I try to answer this question as to why, despite what Raymond says in that blog post, that we have a functioning 64-bit version of the application included with XP Pro x64, but yet it was dropped from Windows Vista because there were apparent problems with porting it to the 64-bit architecture. Now, there are a couple of issues with the 64-bit version included with Pro x64, but it's nothing that makes the game completely unplayable like what was being described by Raymond in that blog post, at least from what I've seen while I've been testing this off camera. And if there was a major issue like what Raymond was describing, I don't see why it would have been included in this version here, unless it was a major oversight by Microsoft. But I'm going to be honest, I don't have the full answer, and it's going to probably take somebody who used to work at Microsoft on this port to explain why exactly it was dropped from Vista. There's also the question of, okay, even if they couldn't develop the 64-bit port, why not just include the working 32-bit version that can be run through WoW 64, which works totally fine, even on modern versions of Windows today? That is a question that I was able to find an answer to, and we'll be discussing that in this follow-up video. So if you guys want to see that, I mean, I'm going to be making it anyway, but if you really want to see it, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Be sure to get subscribed and turn on notifications if you want to see more videos like this in your sub box, which I upload every single week, multiple times actually, every single week on this channel. But that's all for me, guys. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you all in the next video.